What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 50 running back rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season. The goal is to keep this video somewhat concise, not going crazy in depth on every player, just giving you guys some tidbits, some information, talking about some of the players that have moved up or down, either with, news from training camp, potential injuries, or me just doing more research and feeling better about certain players. So running backs today, wide receivers tomorrow. Then I think I'll go through like my top 50 overall rankings the day after that. But let's just dive right into it here. Starting off in tier one, I actually did a full video breaking these three guys down, kind of, comparing them, talking about how I would rank them. So I have Bijan Robinson as my RB1, Jahmyr Gibbs as my RB2, and then Saquon Barkley as my RB3. I do think they're all pretty close together. For Bijan was the RB3 in points per game last year, averaged just over 20 points per game. In the last 12 games, you saw a big uptick in his usage, ended up averaging 22.8 points per game in the last 12. Then we have Jahmyr Gibbs, who had some really interesting splits with and without David Montgomery. Now, he was still really strong with Montgomery healthy, 18.7 PPR points per game, but in the 3 games that David Montgomery missed, his production jumped all the way up to 32.6 points per game. So you could make the case of like, all right, if Montgomery stays healthy, he should be ranked RB3, he should be below Saquon if he's going to average like 18, 19 points per game. I'm just not confident they're going to go back to that like super strong 50-50 split. Like, I don't know how you see what Jahmyr Gibbs did last year without Montgomery with a larger workload and not at least bump him up to like the 55 to 60% opportunity share range. I don't think they're going to use Jahmyr Gibbs as a workhorse, but I do think he should get the edge in opportunities over David Montgomery. And so I'm going to have him here as my RB2. And then for Saquon, the big concern is just the usage he had last year. 482 total touches. That obviously includes the playoffs. And he was the running back one last year, averaged 22.2 points per game. And so if you wanted to say, he was the running back one last year, you're confident in his situation, his usage, his offense, the offensive line, and you want to draft him RB1, I do get it. I just don't think the gap is that extreme. And so the potential risk of him, getting hurt, not being as efficient due to the wear and tear of last year, I'm fine just taking him as the RB3, and maybe I won't be able to draft him there, but I do have him just slightly behind Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. Then moving into tier 2 here, kind of a mini tier within this group. So I'd say the first subsection of this tier would be Christian McCaffrey and Ashton Genty, and then the second half would be Devon Achane and Derrick Henry. For CMC, obviously a super polarizing player. This is all, your risk versus reward tolerance here. In his last 7 seasons, he has had 4 seasons where he's played pretty much the full season, been top 2 in points per game. The other 3 seasons, he has not been able to log half a season. So the definition of boom or bust, if you told me every single running back here stayed healthy for the season, CMC would be my RB1. And so it's possible you're getting to draft the future RB1 of the season, at the RB4 or later spot in like the back end of round 1. But it's also possible that he just sinks your team because he can't stay healthy, he gets hurt, and you've pretty much just set your round 1 pick on fire, or like 1-2 turn, depending on the platform. So I'm willing to take the risk, but if you're not, I can't really say I blame you. And then for Ashton Genty, a high-level running back prospect, 3-down skill set, stepping into a wide-open running back room. One thing that we've been hearing out of Raiders camp that I really like is him getting very involved as a pass catcher. Didn't have a ton of receiving usage last year in 2024, but he was extremely productive as a pass catcher in 2023. 43 receptions for 569 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. So that's totally in his bag, and that's obviously going to maximize his fantasy upside. Then for Devon Achane, definitely one of my favorite running backs this year for fantasy. Was really high on him last year. Definitely paid off with Tua. I still think overall he paid off for you. And I'm also going to be high on him this year. In the 11 games last season where Tua was healthy and started, Devon Achane averaged 22.6 points per game. That would have been the running back one over the full season, ahead of Saquon, ahead of Bijan, ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. And then when we look back to 2023, in Achane's healthy games, the 9 games he played, a meaningful amount of snaps, he averaged 20 PPR points per game. So the ceiling is very, very there. You're just kind of banking on health. And I do understand you're banking on the health of a quarterback who has some serious concussion concerns and a smaller running back who's probably not going to have the same durability as some of the other running backs going around him. But I'm swinging for upside here, and I'd still say he definitely paid off over the last 2 seasons. And so early round 2 area, very in on Devon Achane. And then this is where I'm going to have Derrick Henry to close out this tier. Really strong 2024 season, RB4 at 19.8 points per game. He was second in carries, rushing yards, touchdowns. The reason why it might be slightly lower than consensus, having Achane ahead of him, is just that I think his upside is a little bit capped. Like last season, he was amazing. He was extremely efficient. He hit in the touchdown department, and he was still the running back 4. Now, if he went out this season and just replicated what he did last year, I think you'd certainly feel great about it. But he does come with some risk. I know people, want to completely ignore, his age, all the wear and tear, and he has been superhuman. But like at some point, there's going to be some sort of dip. And I'm definitely not saying that's going to like definitively happen, but whatever percentage chance you put on it, right? Like say 15 to 20% that his body breaks down and, he kind of falls off as a player, you're not really getting like this crazy peak upside for him staying healthy, which is what I do think you're getting for Achane, where like a perfect scenario for Achane, I think he's a 22, 23 PPR point per game guy, whereas Derrick Henry, he's probably around that 20 point per game number. So still very in on him. Just have him here as, what is this, my running back 7. Now moving into tier 3, the first 2 guys I have in this tier, I guess kind of another like subsection of this tier. I have Jonathan Taylor and Bucky Irving. For Jonathan Taylor, he was the running back 7 at 17.6 points per game last year, but it was really a series of like a really rough start to the season and then just a really, really hot close over the last 3 games. So first 11 games of the season, 14 PPR points per game, really like a bust with where you drafted him. Then the last 3, he just went nuclear, 30.8 PPR points per game. We know he's a very talented player. We know he's a very good runner, but I also think just playing within this offense, it's not going to be a great unit. If it's Daniel Jones, you kind of know what you're getting there. If it's Anthony Richardson, maybe there's some efficiency on the ground, but still going to get vultured near the goal line. And then he's never going to be like some super high volume pass catcher. So yeah, he could come in, be a solid, mid to potential high end RB1, but I don't think we're going to be looking at like a 22 plus point per game season. I think he hit 21.9 points per game a few years ago, but that was with like really hitting in the touchdown department. And I just don't see that on this current Colts offense. And then for Bucky Irving, someone who actually also really broke out over the second half of the season. In his last 7 games, averaged over 18 PPR points per game at over 19 opportunities per game. And so he had solid usage. He was also very involved near the goal line. I think sometimes you look at him, smaller running back, Rachaad White is the bigger guy. He had 12 goal line carries to Rachaad White's 4. So he still is going to have that touchdown upside. I think he's a really solid pick at like the back end of the second round. Then the next kind of section within this tier, I have Chase Brown, Amarion Hampton, Josh Jacobs, and Breece Hall. So for Chase Brown, he's someone who I've kind of, moved around a little bit here. Obviously, you can see the upside where in the 8 games without Zach Moss, he averaged nearly 21 PPR points per game, was absolutely force-fed, like 19 carries, 5.5 targets per game. And then you look at the competition, it's nothing crazy. It's Zach Moss, it's Samaje Perine, it's Taj Brooks. The issue is that I don't think Chase Brown has really established himself as like an elite high-end running back, and they also don't have a ton of investment in him. And so if they started to just, spread out some of his opportunities to some other players, like maybe Taj Brooks is working in on some of like the short yardage goal line situations, Samaje Perine getting in there as a pass catcher, then you could definitely see where this could go south for Chase Brown. But I think the upside is there, and so an early round 2 pick I think is a reasonable position for him. Then someone who I'm definitely going to be much higher on than consensus, Amarion Hampton. At this point, I just feel like his ADP is kind of crazy. On a lot of platforms, he's going like round 4. I want to say on Yahoo, he's like even in the early 5th round, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Maybe it's like, since we had one running back go like really early round 1 in Genty, it makes Hampton getting round 1 capital, seem less significant. But this is a round 1 running back pick going to a really fun landing spot with a great offensive line, a team that wants to run the ball. Hampton has, 3-down workhorse size. He has that skill set where he can catch passes. And then the biggest concern has been Najee Harris, and the dude is not practicing because of that eye injury he suffered on 4th of July. And so that was like the big holdup, right? Where it's like, is this going to be a gross split early on? How long is it going to take Amarion Hampton to kind of break out? He is going to have every opportunity to earn this starting job right away when he is on the practice field and Najee Harris is sitting out watching, with his hoodie and sunglasses on, hiding his face. So Amarion Hampton, I'm very in on him. I'd be willing to take him in the third round, and I think he's a really solid pick there. And I think he's someone who could be like one of those late season league winners while also now having some more functionality early in the season. Then the next player here, Josh Jacobs, just seems like a fairly safe pick at the running back position. Not going to be a home run, but could end up being like a nice double for you. So last year, first year with the Packers, averaged 17.2 points per game. He saw a lot of the valuable opportunities, third and red zone touches that led to him being fourth in touchdowns. Didn't really command like massive volume, 67% opportunity share. We know LaFleur doesn't really like to use a full-on workhorse. I think Marshawn Lloyd could play a little bit of a bigger role this year, relative to some of the backups last year, just because he was unable to stay healthy, but they did spend a day 2 pick on him. And so do I see Josh Jacobs being like a top 3 running back? Probably not, but should be someone you feel pretty confident is going to be a running back 1. And then I talked about how I'm high on Hampton. I'm also very high on Breece Hall. First off, I'm just a believer in the talent. I think he has that 3-down skill set. He's a very strong pass catcher, second in total targets over the last 2 seasons at the running back position. Now, there are certainly questions about this Jets offense. It's probably not going to be a great unit, probably going to be bottom 10 in scoring, but I also don't think it's potentially as terrible as some people think. Fields really isn't like a crazy vulture near the goal line. Breece Hall is potentially going to be like the number 2 target on this offense. Like if he was second behind Garrett Wilson in targets, I would not be shocked. Justin Fields is willing to check down. And so it's just a bet on a player who I believe is very talented, has logged a very solid RB1 season. And I think we could see a nice bounce back. And he honestly doesn't even need a huge bounce back from last year. It's just like relative to his ADP, this is much more palatable considering what he did last year. Then moving into tier 4, kind of a smaller tier here, I have Kenneth Walker, Kyron Williams, and James Cook. For Kenneth Walker, I'm really buying into him this season. I think he is a great fit with the new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak. We saw a major increase in his receiving usage last year, 4.8 targets per game. That really was the hurdle he needed to clear for me to kind of buy in on him for fantasy, and he did that. I think he's a talented runner. Clint Kubiak's really hyping him up. If he has that receiving upside, I can't see why he, won't be in contention to be a very strong running back 1 this year. Then for Kyron Williams, definitely lower on him than consensus. This just comes down to me not trusting his 83% opportunity share to stick. We have seen comments from Sean McVay, GM Les Snead, where they've talked about wanting to use multiple running backs, guys with some different skill sets, kind of taking some of the pressure off, minimizing the wear and tear. And then I think you just look at the production last year, it wasn't great. We look at their actions, right? Day 2 pick on Blake Corum last season. This offseason, round 4 pick on Jarquez Hunter. And so with all that being said, I feel like they are leaning towards kind of cutting his usage a little bit. Now, I will say they're in talks for a potential extension. I will be more interested in Kyron if he gets a pretty solid deal at the running back position. If he does not get an extension, I think the floor is very, very low where he has potential downside to just get straight up replaced on the depth chart by a Blake Corum or a Jarquez Hunter. Once again, not saying that's the baseline expectation, but I think it's a potential risk that could be in play that just wouldn't be available for a lot of these other running backs. And so he could still be valuable with like a 65% opportunity share, but his calling card over the last couple of seasons has been that volume, getting very involved near the goal line. And if that's not there, I just don't know, if he's going to have that same upside that we've seen, especially in 2023, where he was much better. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be James Cook. Might seem low considering the fact that he was just the running back 11 in points per game. But when you look at his overall usage, that RB11 finish seemed pretty close to his peak. He was 25th in opportunity share, managed to score 18 touchdowns, which was second most at the running back position, despite having Josh Allen super involved near the goal line. So I do feel like that was very close to his ceiling. Could he hit that again? Sure. But if you're peaking as like a back-end RB1, I'm not really trying to draft you in that fringe RB1 area. If that's your upside, I don't really want to spend running back 11 or 12 pick on a guy like James Cook. Now moving into tier 5, going to start off this tier with Chuba Hubbard. Really strong close to the season once he kind of pulled away from Miles Sanders, 18.1 points per game in his last 13 games. He's kind of a player that I go back and forth on because I can really see the upside where they did extend him. He was used like a workhorse last year, 78% opportunity share. That was 5th highest in the NFL. But then, there are certainly some questions about this offense, probably not going to be an above average unit. And then they have added some competition, bringing in Rico Dowdle, who might be nothing special, but still had like 1,000 yards from scrimmage last year. And then they also draft Trevor Etienne. And so kind of like I talked about with Chase Brown, this could be a spot where you now have guys kind of eating into his usage from multiple angles. And that isn't great. But like I mentioned, the upside is there where maybe they just continue to force feed him. We've seen over the last couple of seasons, Rashad White, Chuba Hubbard, even running backs that aren't like super highly touted, he is still willing to, give him a ton of usage and just feed him the rock. After Chuba Hubbard, someone who I have moved up a few spots, it is Travion Henderson. And this just kind of came into play when I'm getting into more drafts, doing some mock drafts, hopping in on Underdog. And I just want to be hitting the draft button on Travion Henderson. I think he is going to feast in this Patriots offense as a pass catcher. He's gotten very good reviews out of camp. The way Josh McDaniels kind of uses these running backs, sets them up, especially in the receiving game. And then you just look at the wide receiver room. There are a lot of questions. Travion Henderson is a very dangerous weapon. He's a great pass blocker. He has that big play upside. I think he's going to be fine early on. And then I think over the second half of the season, once you're getting into the fantasy playoffs, I do think he could be like a late season hammer for you. After Henderson, we have someone who's probably going to have the opposite trajectory and has had the opposite trajectory over the last few seasons. It is Alvin Kamara. Now, this might seem low. I'm sure a lot of people aren't going to like this considering the fact that he was a running back one last year. But in the last 3 seasons, from weeks 1 through 9, he's averaging 20.3 points per game. That is amazing. That is awesome. In those last 3 years, from weeks 10 through 18, that production falls all the way down to 13.6 points per game. So he helps you get out to like an early lead, helps you build up your record. But then when you need him down the stretch in the playoffs, he has not been there. He's going to be 30 years old this season. This is likely going to be a bottom 5 offense, new coaching staff. So like you can see the way things could kind of go south here, or maybe they don't force feed him, especially in the pass game, as they've done in previous seasons. And the touchdown upside is probably not going to be there, and we can probably bank on him kind of slowing down the stretch. And so with those concerns, that's why I have him here in this tier 5 area. Then I'm going to go with James Conner, someone who I think is a really interesting like mid-round running back target. Just been super consistent year after year. He was the running back 15 in points per game last season. He's averaged 15 PPR points per game in each of the last 4 years. Solid usage, like 15 carries, 3.5 targets per game last year. Just kind of needing to hold off Trey Benson, and Trey Benson didn't really show that he was anything special last season. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be RJ Harvey. No, J.K. Dobbins is getting some hype here. I'm just still a believer in the RJ Harvey skill set. They spent a round 2 pick on him. Big play upside, can get involved as a pass catcher. This is a backfield you want to be a part of. And I do think Sean Payton, has creative ways to use him. And I think, Harvey's going to be a fun option this season. Now, moving into tier 6, going to start off this tier with DeAndre Swift. Now, Swift is a weird player because coming into the offseason, it felt like he was bound to get replaced, get some legit competition, potentially not even be on the Bears moving forward. But we're sitting here, in training camp, and he's the running back 1 on the depth chart. His RB2 is Roschon Johnson, who I think is an interesting pick this year, but hasn't really proven much as an NFL running back. And then DeAndre Swift, fantasy-wise, has been a top 24 guy in points per game in all 5 of his seasons. And so you're sitting here on an offense that's probably going to be a lot better. He was still an RB2 in 2024. And at some point, you just have to be willing to hit the draft button, even if it feels kind of gross. Then we're going to go with Caleb Johnson. Feels like he has a pretty high floor. You know what you're going to get out of him. Early down usage, goal line role in this offense. I just think he's kind of capped in his upside. The offensive line is questionable. Probably not going to have that receiving upside. Also, how good is this offense going to be? And Aaron Rodgers historically has been very willing to pass near the goal line as opposed to just hammering it in there with the running back. And so maybe that changes with him going to the Steelers, but he's one of those rookie running backs that you might actually feel confident playing week 1, whereas you might not feel as great with a Travion Henderson or an RJ Harvey. But I don't know if he has that late season boom potential like some of those other guys have. Then we are going to go with Aaron Jones, and I think he's starting to become a little bit underrated heading into this season. He was top 10 in rushing yards, receiving yards, carries, targets, and receptions last year. His usage was fine, and a lot of people seem to be very scared about this Jordan Mason addition. And I'm not saying this is amazing that they added Jordan Mason, but Mason had a nice few game stretch with the 49ers. That's really like his only production throughout his entire NFL career. I still think Aaron Jones is a pretty good running back, and so I would not be surprised if Aaron Jones was still operating as the clear-cut RB1. And now Aaron Jones has never been like a three-down workhorse, and so Jordan Mason kind of stepping in, getting some early down work, potentially working in on the goal line. I just don't think that's a death sentence for Aaron Jones, and being able to draft him as like a higher end RB3, I think is a very fair price. Next up, we have someone who I think is very, very interesting, and that is Isaiah Pacheco. So he really broke out like towards the end of the 2023 season. Last 4 games of the regular season, 22.3 points per game. He was very productive in the playoffs, went at least for 80 yards from scrimmage in all 4 games. And then he had 2 solid performances week 1 and 2 of 2024, but then he has the broken fibula and then is just a non-factor once he returns. Had 5 games after injury, 5 points per game on a little over 11 opportunities per game, and then he was also just a non-factor in the playoffs. So you can see the upside where if he's fully healthy, back to the 2023 form, he could be the clear-cut RB1 on kind of a wide-open RB room on a Chiefs offense that could bounce back. But if he's not the same player, doesn't have the same explosiveness, breakaway speed, then this could turn into like a really gross split where you've got like Kareem Hunt involved, who was their lead back down the stretch, Elijah Mitchell, who's been operating as the running back 2, I believe, throughout training camp, and then Brashard Smith, who I think is like a fun, receiving gadget option. Probably not going to be like eating out of the Pacheco, opportunities, but still is going to be a factor in this backfield. And so it just comes down to his health. I'm certainly willing to hit the draft button, but you could also see where maybe this doesn't really pan out and he's just not able to separate from these guys. Then I'm going to go with David Montgomery, definitely a little bit lower on him than consensus. Like I talked about with Jahmyr Gibbs, I do think we're going to see Gibbs get a little bit of a larger workload, even when these guys are both healthy. And so the ceiling with a healthy Gibbs is pretty low for David Montgomery, but he's one of these running backs, or like kind of the only running back here of the guys I've talked about who has handcuff upside while also being like a very solid starter, where if Jahmyr Gibbs were to go down, all of a sudden David Montgomery is like a top 12 running back, potentially like top 5 running back week to week. And so maybe this is a little low. I could see moving him up. But then you look at like Pacheco, who could just be like a straight up RB1 for the Chiefs, Aaron Jones, who I do think could have a bounce back. And so within this tier, I think is fair. Then I'm going to go with Tony Pollard, and I've kind of gone back and forth on him. So he was the running back 22 in points per game last year. You can see where that could go better, where this is going to be a much better offense. This is going to be a spot where he could definitely hit in the touchdown department more than he did last year. But we've also heard the coaches talk about kind of wanting to even out the split, get Tajay Spears more involved, kind of take some of the wear and tear off of Tony Pollard. And so that made me feel not as great. But then you look at his line for Vegas, and I'm not taking these as like gospel and just like making my rankings based on the Vegas projections, but his over-under for rushing yards is 900, which is a really, really strong number. And that doesn't seem like a number that's indicative of this being like a very solid split between him and Tajay Spears. So I've kind of gone up, I've gone down. I think this is me kind of like settling in the middle and just accepting what's going to happen here with Tony Pollard. Then I'm going to go with Joe Mixon, obviously a big faller with his potential injury. And obviously it's always tough to rank these dudes who are currently banged up and you don't really know exactly what their status is. So he has a foot injury. As of right now, week 1 is up in the air, which is not great, especially for like an older running back who's had some inefficiency issues. He's not super old, but definitely getting up there, not like someone you'd consider to be super young. And so then you look at like the competition, he's dealing with Nick Chubb, who could still be washed, but you might now have washed Joe Mixon once he gets back. You have Woody Marks, who, could be a factor as a rookie. And so the way I kind of view Mixon here is if he was healthy, he'd be like right in the Alvin Kamara range in tier 5. And so maybe he's back week 1. We don't know if he's going to be the same guy. I just feel like the appeal to Mixon was him dominating the usage and being the workhorse that we saw last year. I think letting some of these other guys get a lot more opportunities, him potentially having to be eased back into the offense, I think that workhorse upside is definitely minimized. And then you also have the downside of him just like not being able to stay healthy or not being close to the same player and potentially even losing the starting spot. And so within this tier, I did put him one spot above the final guy, who was Brian Robinson, just because I think B-Rob's ceiling is so low. But this is where I've currently settled in on Joe Mixon. Like once we're getting into the next tiers, it's kind of like guys who maybe could be the running back ones or just dudes in committees or like strong RB2s. And I do think Mixon should still be ranked ahead of those guys. And then the guy I mentioned, Brian Robinson, I think he's a fine running back 3. He is going to get solid usage on the ground on a good offense, but he's not necessarily getting like the direct benefit of being on a really good offense because you have his quarterback vulturing touchdowns. And so it's not like you're looking at someone with like 15 plus touchdown upside. At least that would, definitely surprise me. And then he's probably not going to be super involved as a pass catcher. So just a very fine RB3. And then moving into tier 7, we're going to go Cam Scatterbo, Jordan Mason, Tyrone Tracy, Jalen Warren, and J.K. Dobbins. I know there's been some debate about Scatterbo versus Tyrone Tracy. Personally, I'm more leaning towards Cam Scatterbo eventually beating out Tyrone Tracy, but expect both to be involved. Tracy broke out as like a day 3 rookie, so both are interesting. Also could be a pretty heavy split. Then we have Jordan Mason, just like a super valuable handcuff, but also could push for some sort of committee with Aaron Jones, which could give him some weekly value. Then we have Jalen Warren, who I actually really like as a player. I just don't feel like the Steelers are as high on him, so he's going to have decent receiving production. You're just hoping he can have enough of a weekly impact that he could be a potential like desperate flex play. And then J.K. Dobbins, someone who I think could start off and potentially be playable in week 1. You just don't trust the durability long term, and it does seem like it would just be a matter of time before R.J. Harvey emerges as like the top running back you want to play for fantasy. Then in tier 8, we're going to go Zach Charbonnet, Tajay Spears, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, Bashal Tutin, some movers here with Dylan Sampson and Quinshawn Judkins, and then Tank Bigsby and Javonte Williams. There's kind of a few players, honestly, like 2 teams I want to talk about here. That is the Jaguars and the Browns. And so my initial read on this Jaguars backfield was I was most interested at price. I was most interested in Bashal Tutin. I just think he's one of these guys that could be like that later season breakout. He's been much cheaper than ETN, and he's even been cheaper than Tank Bigsby on certain platforms. ETN was someone who I was fine drafting, but like wasn't reaching up a ton. Tank Bigsby was a guy that I just like was not super interested in. But reports out of camp so far are that Bashal Tutin's operating as pretty clearly the RB3. That really doesn't scare me off of him. He was never an early season bet. Like if he was somehow going out and just started beating out Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby week 1, like you wouldn't be able to draft him in like the round 11, round 12 area. So that's not shocking to me. What has been interesting is that Tank Bigsby is kind of operating as the running back 1, and then you have Travis Etienne mixing in, more involved as a pass catcher, still involved with, the first team, but Tank Bigsby kind of playing a more prominent role than I initially expected. Now, I do think from a fantasy perspective, Tank Bigsby still has like the much lower ceiling than these other 2, where not going to be super involved as a pass catcher, like really just has not caught passes at the NFL level, which is tough, especially if you're going to be in a split with 1 or 2 other running backs. But I did have to move him up and kind of give him some respect and put him in the same tier, because it's possible week 1, like he's the guy you feel most confident starting. And then I did move Travis Etienne down a few spots, because if you're already like not the established RB1, I think he has the role and the skill set that could potentially get replaced by Bashal Tutin. Like if Tutin emerges, it's probably not going to be him like breaking in and getting the early down stuff, like being an early down grinder, mixing in on the goal line. It's going to be third down usage, those explosive plays, and that's, currently what ETN is lined up to get. So kind of just have these guys much more concentrated than I did in my last running back video. And then let's talk about the Browns here, because we have Quinshawn Judkins dealing with his legal situation. He has not signed his rookie contract yet. He is not at training camp. And so this is just like a really bad situation for Quinshawn Judkins, where we have no idea how long he's going to be out. We have no idea if he could end up getting suspended, getting put on the commissioner's exempt list. Like, it's possible he straight up just doesn't play football this year, and that is obviously very concerning if you're drafting him. On the other side, for Dylan Sampson, all of a sudden he went from like, RB2 in his own draft class on his team in like a pretty gross split or like potential committee, crowded RB room with Judkins and Jerome Ford, to now potentially being the favorite to lead this backfield and just getting way more opportunities to run with the ones than he would have if Quinshawn Judkins was healthy. So even though I do think Judkins is the better prospect, wasn't super high in either of them. The Browns clearly viewed Judkins as a better prospect, so did the NFL. But Dylan Sampson at this point, I do think is the better pick for fantasy, just because there's so much uncertainty here with Quinshawn Judkins. And then some of these other guys, just like RB2s, on decent teams could get some usage. Javonte Williams, just kind of tough to navigate this Cowboys running back room where it's like, yeah, one of these dudes could be valuable, but they're all just kind of gross. Like, you got Jaden Blue reports that the coaching staff thinks he's lazy. Miles Sanders hasn't been good. Javonte Williams hasn't been good. At this point, don't have a clear read of like who's actually going to lead that offense or that backfield. And then the final tier here, this is pretty much handcuff territory. Ray Davis, Rashad White, Trey Benson, Tyler Algier, Najee Harris, Roshan Johnson, and Isaac Rendo. I think the guy who could have some upside, not just as a pure handcuff, would be Roshan Johnson. But I also think his handcuff status is a little bit more up in the air because we just don't really know what this Bears backfield is going to look like. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 50 running backs. Tried to keep it concise. Don't really think I did. Also, it looks like my camera turned off at some point, so that's unfortunate. Hopefully the audio saved. If it did, you guys are hearing this. So thank you all for stopping by. If you enjoyed, hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.